Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Empowered to Advocate podcast. I'm Dana Marie, and I am here with Michelle. And
Hello.
and today we have an episode about evaluations. We have worked a lot with parents over the last couple of months and in the last few weeks, going over their children's evaluations, helping them to interpret those evaluations. And we've sort of been keeping a list of questions, keeping a list of what has come up in those conversations. And so we wanted to share some of that with you today. And the way that we're going to do it is tell you kind of the 5 things that we think that as a parent or caregiver, you should be looking at when you get these super overwhelming, super long reports, right? It's hard to take all that information in at once. It's a lot. And so we want to help you to kind of narrow in and help you to focus a little bit on what you're looking for and really why you're looking at it. So we're going to get started with a little story. We had a client come to us this week or last week, I guess, with some reports for an evaluation for their kiddo. This was a reevaluation. Their child had already been found eligible for special education a few years ago, had been receiving special education services. And this is a reevaluation. It had been 3 years since the last time that their child was tested. And like most parents, they came to us and were like, just help me understand this. Like, what am I looking at? What am I looking for? Help me understand this. And not necessarily with some specific questions. We went through the testing, went through cognitive testing and report, went through the academic achievement testing and report, and I'll cut to the chase. The long story short is we found some discrepancies in the academic achievement testing. What was noted in the charts of the testing for the scores that the child got, and actually from the score report from the actual test, what was noted in there did not match. Did not match what was in the narrative portion of the achievement testing. And so that just brought up, obviously, a whole slew of other questions and prompted us to have a much longer conversation with this parent and then go back and forth with the school team a couple times to get things figured out. And this is like an outlier, right? Like, we're not saying this is going to happen every time or you're going to get a report that's wrong or things like that. But it prompted for us this discussion of like, okay, when parents do come to us or when they're trying to figure this out on their own, sort of like, what are the things that they should be looking at? What are the things that they should be focused on? It was a nice reminder, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, so I was going to say that I know you said it was an outlier, but unfortunately, I think we notice mistakes like that more often than we probably should, whether it's because it's staff who is like school districts who are understaffed or new teachers who maybe haven't proofread things accurately or, whatever. I actually feel like that's more common of a mistake, even if it's only like 1 or 2 scores sometimes, or where, usually there'll be some sort of chart, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but there'll be some sort of chart where it's the test, the subtest, the standard score, the percentile rank, and then like a label as average, below average, and sometimes the percentile rank and standard score don't match the label. So the standard score will actually indicate average scores, and then it'll say well below, and it'll be like, well, what? And I mean, that's really unfortunate because those labels are what parents and caregivers are most likely to understand the most. Most people, and not everybody fully understands like what the importance of those labels might be, but almost everybody understands that like average means that you're in the average range. You're like most other people in that area. Above average means it's probably an area of strength. Below average, probably an area of challenge. Well below means you're having some difficulty there, right? So when these things don't line up, when the information throughout the text does not line up, it's an inaccurate score and can have huge, huge consequences in how we're determining eligibility, how we're providing services or not providing services. It's a big mistake.
And this was exactly it. This was the conversation we ended up having with this parent. Like, if the scores, we went through some hypothetical situations, and if the scores in the chart were correct, their child was making incredible progress. If the scores in the narrative were correct, Their child needed lots of support,
Oy, oy, oy.
lots of academic support. And so it was going to be the difference between needing and getting services, or like Michelle said, even being found eligible for special education. I mean, it was going to be used for big decisions, right? It was going to be used for big decisions. And I think it's important to note here, and this is a conversation that I had specifically with this parent. And I said, listen, I'm not saying this to I'm not saying this to get anybody in trouble. I'm not saying this to I don't know, to pull the rug out from somebody, the school team or whatever. I'm saying this as a special education teacher myself. Who knows what we are juggling every single day, what we are responsible for every single day. And I just in my gut know that this is somebody who was probably, like Michelle said earlier, trying to maybe rush or pace things quickly, or, these things happen. And by bringing them up, I know parents can sometimes feel, we help this parent craft the email to the school so that it was thoughtful. Parents can sometimes feel like, oh, I don't want to, it makes me sound like I'm nitpicking. It makes me sound like but it's just too important. It's too important to let go. And it's too important to not say anything. So with it, if you are looking at these reports by yourself, or maybe with another parent or with a family member or a friend, and you don't necessarily have the support of, an advocate or an attorney, or you don't need one, there are some things that you can look to A, make it easier for yourself to understand, but B, to ensure that everything is what it's supposed to be and that you're getting the most accurate information. So the first, as this parent's advocate, the first thing I did when I was like, fishy is going on here, I went in this student's file. We've been working with them all 3 years since they were found eligible. And I took out the last academic achievement testing from kindergarten, and I put them side by side. And when I did that, I was like, this discrepancy is really large between what this one is saying and what this one is saying. But when I look at just the charts and the scores in there, they're really similar. And it's like what we would expect for growth from a child this age, from a student in this grade. So comparing those helped me say, my gut is telling me the scores in the chart are correct. My gut is telling me those are the correct scores, that the narrative is the incorrect scores. And that's what we need to ask the school team about. And that was just a super quick, it took me probably 10 minutes to go back and just remind myself what the last testing said. With academic achievement testing, if the child is getting the appropriate services, if they are in the appropriate placement, we expect to see those scores grow. We expect their academic achievement rise over the course of 2 or 3 years. If we're using, for instance, grade level equivalents or age equivalents, we expect them, if they were in line with their age and grade in kindergarten, we would expect them to still be in line with their age and grade in third grade or a little bit above. We would not expect them to fall unless something traumatic or dramatic had happened. So that just helped me to say to the parent, don't worry, I actually think the narrative's wrong. I don't think that this child is below average in all these areas. Let's reach out and get clarification. But if I hadn't looked at the testing from 3 years ago, which I remembered but didn't remember exactly what the scores were, I would have been a little bit more unsure which one was right, if that makes sense. So the first thing is compare and contrast. Let's use analytical skills, compare and contrast. If you have previous testing from a couple of years ago or 3 years ago, take that out, look at it, look at them side by side, and just say, does this feel like does this look like the same student? Does this look like the progress he or she or they were expected to make over this course of time?
Yeah, I think that also brings up a really important point about, the difference. So almost all students, depending on your disability or the suspected disability, is going to drive what testing is done. And typically during an initial evaluation, you have cognitive testing or psychological testing that's done. And this can encompass cognitive testing, so how your brain works. This is just like a real quick overview here of what some of this jargon is. So we have psychological testing, the cognitive testing, your working memory, how your brain processes and manipulates information, how you use visual information to solve problems, how you use auditory information to solve problems, how your brain is working, right? Sometimes people might refer to this as IQ testing. That's not very common in schools for it to be called that. but it gives you a scale of where you are average in relation to the rest of the population, a normed population in the United States, to give us an idea of how your brain is working with information, and then being able to use that and then produce responses to that information. We would not expect these types of scores to really fluctuate ever.
Now,
Unless you have a traumatic brain injury or some sort of medical condition where there is a trajectory of neurological changes to occur. So typically, for a student with a specific learning disability in reading or math or communication disability, we would not expect changes in these types of tests to change. And that's why some districts don't do that testing every 3 years. Sometimes they choose to not do that. That's a topic for another day.
correct.
The academic achievement testing is where your child is being compared again to a normed population in their abilities to read, write, and do math. And that's how sometimes a discrepancy between the cognitive scores and the academic scores are used to determine a specific learning disability. There's other ways of determining a specific learning disability. That's another topic. Trying to stay on topic here, but I think that's important too, to know that there might be changes in the academic achievement. It would be more likely that there would be changes or fluctuations there than there would be in the cognitive testing. And this is because if your child has been or has not been receiving services. So if there was an initial evaluation and your child was not found eligible, we might then see in 1, 2, 3 years, those norms in relation to their age or grade level peers could see a bigger difference, right? So those scores could look different over the years. But if they've been receiving services, it should be in that trajectory, like Dana was just saying, right? So, Dan, do you want to go over it? So the other big jargony piece here is that, like, what a standard score is, what a percentile rank, because that's what you're usually going to see in a report, especially in a chart. So I don't know if you want to,
So
toss it back to you.
this was the second thing that came up when we were talking to this parent. And so this is our second thing that we want to make sure we focus on today is when you look at those charts, they are only as helpful as you understand what the numbers are.
Yep.
You see all those charts in the reports, they're only as helpful to you as you understand what all of the information means. And I'm actually just going to focus on, Michelle kind of already talked about the standard score is what's going to signify sort of those above average, below average, average, low, superior, sort of those like key names, right, of where a child is like on a spectrum. That's going to come from those standard scores. The ones that can get a little confusing are the percentile, right?
Mm-hmm.
The percentile ranks next to those standard scores, and the number might be 35. Let's say it's 35. That means that your child, based on the normed test across the country, kids of their same age, your child is performing on that specific subtest, on that specific test, higher than 35% of their same age peers. If it's 90, that means they're performing better than 90% of their same age peer. So if your child is 12.2, right, that's their age equivalent right now, they're going to be normed against other 12.2 students, 12.2 children. And that percentile is going to give us a sense of where they are in comparison to their peers, in comparison to other children of the same age. Some testing, not all testing, some testing includes a grade equivalent as well, right? So your child might be in second grade and their grade equivalent on maybe a reading subtest is 3.2. So that means that they are performing against the standard at a third grade level versus the second grade that they're actually at. Plus,
Yeah.
so there are kind of a couple different things to look at. Like Michelle said, For some parents, it can be super helpful to just look at those average, above average, below average, so on and so forth. That gives you a sense of, is your child performing on average the same as other children their age? Are they performing a little bit lower, a little bit higher, so on and so forth? One thing we would want to sort of show you and make sure that you see is at the beginning of every report, especially academic achievement, there should be a chart that has nothing to do with your child, but that tells you what those numbers, what those names, and that you would use as your key to understand your own child's report. So much like with everything else in special education, there's so much terminology. There is so much jargon. There's so much language that you have to sift through to get to what you actually want to know. We just recommend you use sort of at the beginning of the report. You use some of those initial sort of charts that will tell you what everything means. And then if it feels helpful to you, as you read through the narrative, go back to the charts that are usually embedded within the text of the report to match up and see where your child is in comparison. It can be totally understandably daunting. Like, we get that. Like, it can be daunting. It can be super overwhelming. Sometimes you can just Google, right? What does this mean? What does GE mean? Grade equivalent, right? Sometimes you can Google. Sometimes it's a super quick, like another parent might be able to be, that means this. Phone call with somebody like us. It could be just a one-time phone call with an advocate or somebody to, spend 45 minutes just to go through the testing just so you understand it. But knowing what some of that language means is going to help you to understand the report in a more full and complete way. You know what else you can do? And I wish more people did this, quite frankly. You can reach out to the people who are writing the report. So actually, kiddo, every day, you can reach out to them and say, thank you so much for sending me the report. Can you email me kind of a summary, or can you help me to understand what these two terms mean? Or can you help me to understand? We worked with this client the other day. It was one quick email to the team chairperson trying to get clarification. They emailed us back within 12 hours and said, oh my goodness, so sorry. That's not accurate information. Here's the accurate. We had the problem solved like within a day. And I know it can feel scary sometimes to do that. Just reaching out to the team as well. And just asking, what does this mean? How do I sift through this information? So number one, compare and contrast, look at old reports. Number two, we didn't specifically name, but making sure the information is accurate.
Yep. And that includes your child's name,
everything.
Birth date, grade level. I have seen reports where the kid is listed as being in the wrong grade, and then it has turned out that the person doing the testing had actually had the kid in the wrong grade and had then normed everything with the wrong grade. That's going to skew the results. Yeah. So just even double checking those kinds of details are going to make a big difference, or could make a big difference.
And file that all under accurate information. Ensure the information is accurate. And then number three, sifting through all that jargon, all the terminology, all of the language, and trying to help yourself to understand what the report's actually saying. And then number four, Michelle likes to talk about this one. Number four, the begin and the end of the report.
Yeah.
Beginning and the end.
So the beginning and the end is, the beginning of the report is going to tell us why the testing is being completed, and should also give some developmental history, some background information. If it's an initial evaluation, there might be like the both a re-eval and an initial educational background, any previous testing that has happened, and why the testing's happening. We should not be just like willy-nilly, testing students. There needs to be a reason and questions. What questions are we trying to answer educationally for the student through this testing? So those should be listed out. And this is a really good place where caregivers are probably the experts in your child. You are going to know their medical history. You're probably the one who provided this information. And just making sure that all of that is correct, because sometimes you're doing like a conversation with the school psychologist or the school counselor, like over the phone, or maybe you're doing multiple things. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. just making sure when you read that report that information is accurate. Like I said before, birthdays, names, gender, grade level, all that stuff. And then the summary section at the end is where this should be, pulling all of that jargony stuff in the middle of the report that's super important. It should be pulling it together in a way that most of us can understand. Educators, caregivers, everybody should be able to understand that. It should still sound professional, but it doesn't need to sound as jargony in that summary. And that summary should also come with some recommendations. Now, the recommendations should not, because it's an eligibility meeting, should not say, I recommend 2 times 30 a week speech. But it could say something like some accommodations that could be used in the classroom, or it could say specialized instruction, right? Like it might say something like that, but giving you kind of an idea of you can kind of read between the lines if the service provider is going to be recommending services or not. You should be able to read between, even if they don't explicitly say it. You should, when you read these reports, have an inkling as to which way an eligibility meeting should go. And, like Dana Marie said before, like if you have questions, you should be getting these reports. You usually have to explicitly say, I want them 48 hours before the meeting. That's to give you time to read through them. And if you don't, you may have a team who is not going to answer questions about the reports over the phone or over the email, because that's what the meeting's for, right? So marking up your text, writing your questions down, writing them right on the report, so that when you're in the meeting and they're going over their summaries, you can be like, I just had a question about this part and you may have answered it, but I'm not sure.
Yes.
So getting those reports ahead of time, marking it up and asking questions so that you fully understand. So you're a fully informed participant in the meeting.
That's the goal, right? That's the goal, for you to be fully informed. So we know it can be super overwhelming to look at these reports ahead of time, to understand what they mean, and to dig through them, especially if you have if your child receives lots of services, or if your child has been tested in a lot of different areas, it can feel super overwhelming. But we want you to remember these 5 things as you go through the reports. Compare and contrast to previous reports if you have them, to previous testing if you have them, to see if it just aligns and makes sense. Make sure that information is accurate, right? Everything from name and birth date to whether numbers match up, right? Making sure the information is just completely accurate. Sifting through that jargon, knowing what you actually need to know, right? Knowing the terms that are going to be important to understand the rest of the report. Looking up ones that you don't know, asking somebody who does know them, so that you know exactly what you're looking at. And then finally, 4 and 5, the beginning of the report. What are the questions we're answering? Why are we doing this testing? And the end of the report, how can we pull this all together? What does this tell us about this particular child, their student's profile, their learning profile, what their strengths are, what their areas of need are, and like Michelle said, some recommendations for the future.
Yeah.
Trust me when we say we know getting these reports can often feel like a lot. It can feel like a lot to get through. But like Michelle said, our ultimate goal, and we want your ultimate goal to be, when you walk into any meeting, but certainly eligibility meetings, to be as informed as you possibly can, as an informed caregiver, an informed parent, and an informed member of the school team.
Yes. And if you are in this process or thinking about referring your child and you're already feeling like maybe some extra support or some extra time with people who are experts who can help you sift through these things, please reach out and schedule a consultation with us. We do have our 3-month coaching special. And typically, especially initial evaluations, 3 months of coaching is really an ideal amount of time to spend together. You can find out all that information. We have a special rate through the end of this month, which is today. When this is published, it's going to be today. And then the prices are going up to our regular prices again on February 1st. But, reach out to us, go to the website, empoweredtoadvocate.com. Reach out to us. We'll have a chat. Sometimes you just need 1 or 2 sessions, but really, usually those packages that we have give you much more flexibility to utilize your time in a way that's going to span the whole amount of time of whatever challenge you are facing right now with your child's education.
And we would love to support you for just a couple of months. We'd love to support you for 3 months and then send you on your way when you feel empowered and when you feel ready and when you feel like you have the information at your fingertips that you need to be your child's best advocate. So please, like Michelle said, reach out to us. We would love to hear from you, chat with you, and potentially work with you. And with that, thank you so much, as always, for tuning in to the podcast. And we will talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.